How do you install EG4's Off Grid 6000XP inverter? Today I'm showing you how to install this inverter, and I'm upgrading my setup. Right now I've got a charge controller, distributor, inverter, monitoring solution, and I'm taking all of this and I'm going to put this in its place because this does all of this in one. Today I'm showing you how to do this from start to finish. You're watching Taddy Digest. I'm Tad. Let's get started. Here's the box that contains the inverter. I'm going to open it up, show you what's inside. Inside we've got the inverter. We've got our manual, our most important piece here. We've got expansion bolts with some nuts. We've got our Wi-Fi dongle. We've got a couple cables. One's for communication from the battery to the inverter, and then one is for paralleling. So this is what's contained inside. Very nice packaging. I'm so excited. These are my new rack mount type EG4 48 volt DC 100 amp hour batteries that I'm going to pair with that 6000 XP. This is my old 12 volt DC 400 amp hour EG4 battery. The reason I'm not using this is because you cannot pair a 12 volt battery with a 48 volt inverter. So I'm using 48 volt DC rack mount type batteries. I got two of these from Signature Solar. If you want a discount, use discount code TADDY50 to get $50 off. These batteries were around $1,400 a piece. I got two of those. The inverter was around $1,400. So right here on technical specifications for this battery, under battery data, you'll see that the recommended battery capacity per inverter is greater than 200 amp hours. So you need to have at least 200 amp hours of battery, and then up above that you'll see, if you scroll to the left, nominal voltage for this inverter is 48 volt DC for the battery data. So that's the reason I got these two new batteries. Don't forget, check out the link in the description or click this link to go to Signature Solar to get your discount. We're going to be installing these today, and that's the reason we're taking out this 12 volt inverter. The first step for installing this inverter is, where am I going to mount it? And that's where I'm going to use my template. My template shows me the dimensions of the inverter, and I think the best location is right here. So now that I know where my inverter is going to be mounted, I need to mount this on a non-combustible surface. So if you've got concrete or block, that's perfect. I'm not going to mount this on the wood. I'm going to use some type of metal to go in between the wood and that inverter. And you could use unistrut and some cone nuts, and that would be a suitable mounting hardware or materials to use. We're going to actually put a piece of metal in between the wood. So what do I do first after I find where I'm going to mount my inverter? I'm going to turn my disconnect off. That way I don't have any PV power coming into my charge controller. Then I'm going to turn my battery off. You can see I don't have any lights now. And now I'm going to go ahead and disconnect all of this, including my box here. Why am I disconnecting or taking my box and removing it? Because I'm upgrading my box. Because now, instead of having a 1,000 watt inverter, 1,200 watt inverter, I've got a 6,000 watt inverter. So now I'm going to be able to power more than just my solar powered mini split and my receptacles and lights. So I've got a couple extra spaces in this new box. So let's go ahead and remove all this. Now that I've got everything off of the wall, this is going to be the spot for that inverter. Now I know where it's going to go, so I'm going to put a couple boards in place, and then I've got a piece of metal, which I'm going to show you, that I'm going to mount before I mount this inverter in place. I used some deck screws that are 4-inch to mount these two boards in between my studs. Now I've got my piece of metal. I've got a sheet metal shop, so I cut a piece of metal and hem the edges, that way it's not sharp, and this is going to go right here. Now before you mount your inverter on the wall, make sure that whatever you're mounting that inverter on, you actually use your template. What I did was I put my template up to my sheet of metal, and you can see where I've marked 1, 2, 3, and then down here 1, 2, 3. This is going to allow me to make less mistakes, because if I've marked my holes where they're supposed to be, whenever I put my inverter up here, then those holes are going to line up where my screws are going to go. So now I'm going to take zip screws and I'm going to mount this piece of metal on the wall. Now that we've got a non-combustible surface to mount this to, it's not brick, it's not concrete, so we're not using those expansion bolts. I'm going to be using some 5/16 screws. These are 1.5 inches. I would get 2 inch if I were you. This is around 50 pounds. So if you have somebody that can help you hold it while you mount it, that's advised. That's a great idea. I am going to just do this myself. I'm going to hold it up with my left hand, and I'm going to put that screw in there in the top. And now, are all my screw holes lined up? Oh, yes, they are. That is beautiful. So now, I've got 2 screws in the inverter mounting plates. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put the rest of the screws in. We'll get to the next step. If you want it to be straight on the wall, get a level. Get a little torpedo level. Now, we're going to take off the cover so we can see all the electrical connections, and we can begin to wire this. We're going to start our wiring by connecting our PV first. It's recommended that you use a DC breaker or DC isolator that's 4 poles, 600 volt, 20 amp in between your solar modules or your solar array or panels and your inverter. And this inverter has got 2 MPPT PV charging circuits. We've got circuit number 1 and circuit number 2. So we can have these 2 strings that are independent and that utilize 17 amps. What this means is that you can have 2 strings that are paralleled for any modules having less than 8.5 amp IMP rating. So I'm going to go ahead and take my knockout, probably one of these 1-inch knockouts right here. I'm going to take this knockout out, and I'm going to put a conduit fitting in here, and then I'm going to run a wire from this PV isolator in through this hole, and I'm going to connect it because I'm only going to have 1 string. But I'm so happy that I have this inverter, because now I'll be able to plug in my last solar panel over there that I was not able to plug in because my last charge controller couldn't handle the total voltage. This will handle a lot more voltage. My other charge controller could handle 100 amps and 250 volts. And this one can handle over 400 volts, so super excited. If you want to learn how to wire a PV disconnect like this, I'm going to put a link down in the description, and right here you can click on that link, watch that video, and you can learn how to wire a disconnect like this for PV. I'm going to strip the 2 wires for the 1 string that I'm using. There's the positive. There's the negative. Now to connect these wires into the MPPT, I'm going to be using a flathead screwdriver. Loosen that up and slide it into place. And let's make sure that's connected. Oh yeah. Pull on it, it shouldn't come out. Loosen this up. Slide it in there, get it connected. Now we can turn on the disconnect for the PV and the disconnect for the PV, and then click the on button here. And with only our PV circuit connected, should have enough power, and we do. Looks like we have 134 volts coming from the PV. If we take a look right here at some of the facts, it says MPPT voltage range 120 to 385. So we need 120 volts to operate this inverter. And we've got 134. I'm going to go ahead and connect the panel that I've never been able to connect because my charge controller couldn't handle it. Then we'll finish the wiring. Now that I've got the 6000 XP, I can connect this last panel. So I'm going to take this, disconnect it, and I'm going to connect this last panel, this last 395 watt panel. All right, now let's go check the voltage input. Now look what we got, 168 volts, 167 volts, but there's no battery. So let's go ahead and finish the wiring. Disconnect the PV, turn this off. I'll go ahead. Now I'm gonna wire up from my inverter to this load panel. I'm gonna remove this old load panel and put this one in its place. Now that we've got our load center mounted on the wall, our critical loads panel, we can focus on the AC connections from our load terminals at the inverter to this panel. We got some 3/4 conduit up top here, and this is what we're going to use to feed the wires from the inverter to my panel, and we're using 8 AUG. It's recommended that you use a wire size of 8 AUG from the grid connections, the load connections, or the generator connections. I'll show you that. But we're going to feed those wires in, and we're going to have our 2 black wires right here on these lugs. Then we're going to have our white wire, our neutral, on this lug. And then I added a ground bar in here, and this is going to be for our green wire or our ground. Here's where we took out the 3/4 knockout, and we've got our 3/4 conduit going over to our box. You can see right here where we've got our load terminals, and this is where we're going to run that 8 AUG wire from L1 and L2. And then we're going to run our white wire from the neutral bar, and then our ground wire to from the potential earth terminal. So we've got generator, which you should be using 8 AUG for this. This is your AC input from your generator. Then you've got your AC input from your grid, and then you've got your load. This is your AC output. If you are feeding this with the grid, you will not be able to sell back because this is an off-grid inverter. If you're wanting to sell back, you can look at the 12K PV or the 18K PV. This right here is the 6000, and the reason it says off-grid is because you cannot sell back with this inverter. This is the size wire I'm using, 8 AUG, and then this is my ground, and you can see it is 10 AUG. I got 4 wires total, 8 AUG, and we've got the 2 black wires, the white wire, and the green wire. So 2 hots, neutral, and ground. Now that we've finished our wiring from the load breaker to our load panel, this is what it should look like. You see I've got 2 black wires here, my white wire going to my neutral, my ground wire going to my ground. If you take a look over here, that's my 3/4 fitting and conduit. Now, moving up over here, you can see it comes in my box, and this is what it looks like. Black, black, white, ground. Now we're going to wire up our battery connections. Don't forget your Phillips screws that hold the Wi-Fi dongle in place. Wi-Fi dongle plugs in right here on the side of the inverter, and then you put your screws in. Now it's time to connect these 2 48-volt DC batteries in parallel. You never want to connect these batteries in series. I'm going to show you how to connect them in parallel, and then we're going to connect these batteries into our battery connections on our inverter. To connect the wires to the battery terminal connections, we need to get the 2 nuts that are contained in that same plastic bag that contains the expansion bolts, so that we can utilize these to connect our cables. So let's go ahead and connect our batteries together using the 5 AUG wires with the ring terminals that come in the same package as the batteries do. And let's go ahead and get them connected to the inverter. Now that we've got the batteries wired in parallel, never want to wire it in series. Remember that. We've got them wired in parallel. They're connected to the inverter. Now I'm going to show you the proper way to turn everything on and set everything up, from the communication protocol to the type of battery we're using on the inverter and how to hook up that communication cable. So, wiring real quick is super simple. We got the negative to the negative, and then the negative to the negative, right? Then positive to positive, and then positive out to the inverter. Make sure you get the torque specs when you're tightening up those screws. Those are in the manual. First thing we want to do before we turn on the batteries is turn on the inverter's battery breaker, like that. Then we can turn on the batteries. So silver button, then breaker. Now we've got some dip switch settings right here. And we're not going to switch any of these yet. We're going to go to this screen, and you see there's an enter button on the very right and then a return button on the left. We're going to click that return button, hold it for 6 seconds, and then let go after 6 seconds, and you're going to see protocol. Then we're going to scroll down to our CAN protocol, and we're going to select P07 Lux, right? You can go up and down and select which one you want. This is what it's set for, EG4 Lux. I'm going to set it for P07 Lux, and then I'm going to click enter. It's going to throw you out there. And then we can take and reset the power for this one battery. Now, you don't have to set the protocol for this battery because these are tied in parallel. So once we set that up, then we'll go back in, we'll check the protocol, and then we'll set the dip switch settings. So since this is the first battery in line, we're going to turn number 1 to the left. It's in the off position. Now we're going to go down to the next battery, since this is address number 2, and we're going to take and turn the 2 into the left position, or off. So this is the total setup right here for these batteries. Now, battery breaker on first, right, on the inverter. Then these breakers on. Then this silver button. Then we turn on our PV. PV disconnect. PV disconnect. Now we can turn on our load breaker to power our panel. There's our load breaker. Now we can go into our settings in the inverter. Now I'm going to set the battery type. So hit the enter button. Once it starts beeping twice, let go. You're going to see the box with the wrench beside it. You're going to hit the up button twice to 3. And then we're going to hit enter. Type lithium ion because I've already changed it. You can do lead acid or lithium. Then I'm going to hit battery brand is 1 because it's EG4. All right, hit return. Now we got to hook up our communication cable. We're using the orange cable that says battery COM. We're going to hook this into the port that says battery COM all the way to the left. Boop. And then we're going to take this to our first battery where it says CAN. So we're going to put this in. We're not going to do a communication cable between this battery and this battery because these are paralleled. So we should be in good shape. Remember again, never put these in series. Put them in parallel. Now we're going to check the data on the inverter. Everything should be communicating. I love the fact that when I buy an EG4 battery that it comes charged 55%, 54%. I love it. Now, what do we got? 52.5 volts for our battery. PV is 149. And then usable, okay, is 120. So we should have 240 volts to our load panel. True test would be to turn on a breaker. This is for our lights, receptacles, and mini split. Wow. We got power. Let's check the box and check the voltage. Checking the output AC power from the load breaker, L1 and L2. What do we got? 240 volts. So before I had an inverter that was able to output an AC power of 120 volts only. Now that I have this inverter, I'm able to use 240 volts. So I can power 240 volt loads as well as 110 volt loads. I am using the solar powered AC by EG4 Electronics, and it's 120 volt AC power. Also uses DC power. That's why I have the 3 panels outside connected to it. You want to learn more about the solar powered air conditioner, I'll put a link in the description, and I'll put a link right here. I'm loving the new setup. Let me know in the comments what you think of the older setup I had versus the newer setup. To me, I had a bunch of stuff on the wall and I didn't have a very good output or capacity. Now I have a greater output and capacity that can handle better applications, more applications, and it's simple. It's simplified. I also have a good warranty. I have 10-year warranty on the batteries. I have a 5-year warranty on the inverter. My old setup was around $3,000, and that was for 1,000 watts. Now I've got 6,000 watts, and altogether I'm going to spend around $4,000. If you need a really nice off-grid inverter, you're not worried about feeding back through to the grid or net metering, then check out the 6000XP. If you need more than 6,000 watts, go with the new 12,000XP. This is a great choice. Also, if you want help with your design, you don't know what your solar needs are, whether off-grid or grid-tied, definitely call Signature Solar. I'll put the link in the description. Go to their website, call them on the phone. They'll help you design your system for free. Then you can order it. And remember, I've got a discount code, Taddy50. So you can use that discount code. You can get $50 off, and then you can have a really cool setup like this. Hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you learned something. If you did learn something, let me know what it was down in the comments. If you've got a question, remember, questions can lead to new content. But if you don't have a question, that's okay. Let me know who you are. Let me know where you're from. Stay tuned. I've got more videos on different features like the Bluetooth app that are coming up, and I'll post those videos down in the link in the description. Don't forget to check out the solar powered AC video. I've got that there if you want to learn more about the solar powered air conditioner. You've been watching Taddy Digest. I'm Tad, and I'll keep you cool if you let me.